So my name is Menu. I am CGIA chair this year, and I have been on the board of CGIA since 2017. I will be moderating today's webinar. So this webinar series was promoted by CGIA's focus on advocating for GIS coordination and collaboration within the state of California. We call it the webinar series Brown Bag because it is originally meant to be somewhat informal, open, and available when most folks are around in our lunch hours. But as we know, there have been changes during this time and most folks are working from home. So I'm glad that you can still join us in this hour. It is our hope that this webinar series serves as a way that enhance the sharing of best practices, the ideas, the experience across all GIS users and stakeholders. So as a reminder, CGIA's missions that when I show here is to promote GIS standards, serving as a resource for our members and encourage the coordination and the management of GIS throughout the state. So by that, I'm excited to introduce our speakers today, Jim Sparks and Christina Bach-Shavira. Jim will be presenting information about experiences of setting up GIS governance in the state of Indiana. And Christina Bach-Shavira, she will be bringing us back to California and talk about the data stewardship program in the Department of Water Resources. Jim Sparks is Director of Geoinformatics at the Polis Center in Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, and former GIO at State of Indiana. Jim has spent most of his career working with geospatial information. His experience has come through in the various positions in GIS as a construction surveyor, cartographer, parcel mapper, and consultant. Jim has worked in county government, state government, higher education, and the private sector. In October 2007, the governor of Indiana appointed Jim as Indiana's first GIO with a statutory mission to facilitate the development, maintenance, and distribution of comprehensive statewide geographic data. In March 2018, Jim became the director of geoinformatics at the Polis Center at Indiana University IUPUI campus. Since the inception in 2000, Jim has been actively involved with, with the Indiana GIS Council. Serving as the president of the board of IGIC in 2019, and now he is a past president on the executive committee. Jim is also a member of NESGIC. Christina Bach-Shavira is an engineering geologist with California Department of Water Resources in the Sustainable Groundwater Management Office. Christina has been active with NoCal URISA and the URISA International for years. She is former president of NoCal URISA, former CAB chair for URISA International, former CalGIS conference chair, formerly active with the California Mapping Coordination Committee, former chair of the California State Government GIS User Group. Christina enjoys helping people to work better together. She's also enjoys bluegrass, traveling with her husband, and volunteering with the deaf community. So before our first speaker, Jim, takes over, I would like to let you know that we like to see you and have seen you, but we will be close the video to save our bandwidth for our participants. Right. If you have any questions during the presentations, please type them into the chat room. We will monitor that, and we'll take a few questions at the end of both presentations. Thank you. So with that, I will hand it over to Jim.
Very good. Okay, so as Anmin said, I'm going to talk about how GIS has been governed in Indiana because that's what I know. And I hope that it will be an interesting story to you. I want to start with a little bit of history because, you know, GIS, well, I guess I'm going to start with my own history first, forgot about that. And I'm not going to spend any time with this because Anmin already went through this, but I will say this, as Indiana's first Geographic Information Officer, having had experience at the county level, the state level, I had 2 tours of duty in state government in Indiana, and also spending time before coming back to the Polis Center in the higher ed area was helpful, but most of my career was in private sector, and that's still my natural way of thinking, and that's been very helpful also. I'm not just a GIS propeller head. I've got a life outside of GIS, and I wanted to share just a second or two of that with you. You might especially enjoy the image in the bottom right corner. Some of you might be old enough to remember those days. I do fondly. So here's the history that I was going to talk about. This is how GIS governance grew up in Indiana. And you can see there's a timeline across the top. I would say in the late 1980s, the folks who were doing the most with GIS in the state of Indiana were either university folks or they were from the private sector. University people, unlike different companies in the private sector, felt like it would be a really good idea to get together and share best practices and what's going on. And so they did that in 1989 by creating a university alliance. That later moved over to be something that the state government took over. University stayed on board, but it kind of moved over to Indiana state government in 1991. And then after operating several years, that transitioned to a larger group encompassing a much broader audience, and that became the Indiana GIS Initiative, or INGISI. And from that, then later in 2001, the Indiana Geographic Information Council, a body similar to the one that you're all associated with, became incorporated. And I want to drop back down just a little bit. In 1997, MSC was acquired by Analytical Services, Inc. Why is that important? I'll tell you. I'm glad you asked that. In the probably from late 80s through most of the 90s, MSC was a very competitive GIS services company headquartered in Indiana. When it was purchased by ASI in 1997, there were about 420 or so GIS practitioners that worked in the office in downtown. By 2002, when ASI closed the Indiana office, all those 400 plus GIS practitioners scattered to the 4 winds. But a lot of them, most of them, stayed in the state of Indiana. And it was really nice because any kind of GIS meeting that I would go to for a long, long time, and to some extent even today, there would be people there that I worked with at MSE. And we all shared a common background, common language, common set of experiences. And that gave us a level of trust that was just there. It didn't have to be grown or created. It was just there. And I think that was extremely helpful, especially when I was GIO for Indiana. So back up to IGIC, starting in 2001, became the voice for GIS practitioners in Indiana, was really the driving force to get a state GIO law passed. And it took, I believe it was 4 years, introducing the bill every year, and it would get a little farther every year that it was introduced, and finally in 2007, then it passed and became state statute. And I'm going to talk in some detail about what's in that state statute. But as a result of that, in October of 2007, because of that state statute, Indiana hired its first geographic information officer. By 2018, I had left that position to go back over to the Polis Center, and Megan Compton, someone I'm sure many of you know, took over and is just doing an outstanding job in that role. And I will add also, last year, the Indiana Geographic Information Council went through some really tough growing pains. We had an executive director since 2001, a full-time person, the only full-time hire that IGIC has ever had. Phil Worrell retired from that, and we decided to move the administrative functions to a management company and for the board to take a higher level of involvement to keep IGIC going. And that was a fundamental shift. The other thing, while we're on this slide, I would like to talk about is some of the projects in the timeline up here. You can see our first statewide GIS conference was late in 1990. We had this thing in 2001 that was put together to study how to extend a major highway from Indianapolis down to Southwest Indiana. And there was a lot of cool statewide data in that. We called it the GIS Atlas for Indiana. We had our first statewide ortho project in 2005. We started our data sharing initiative. I'll talk more about all these projects in just a bit. In 2008, the GIS Atlas for Indiana became the Indiana map, as it is still known today. And our second statewide ortho, first statewide LiDAR project was in 2011. We improved Indiana's NHD in 2011 also by adding high resolution data from the ortho LiDAR, but also from local data sources. The third statewide ortho project happened, 2016 through 18 actually. And then we started our second statewide LiDAR project in 2018. The first one was QL3, the second one is QLT2. And I think all the data has been captured now, but it has not all been delivered. So that kind of sets things up for us to talk just a little bit about that state statute. I see 4-23-7.3, something that I spent way more time studying than you can ever imagine. It assigned a couple of dozen different responsibilities to the GIO, but that's too many things for me to think about. I can think about 5. I can handle that. Those 5 buckets of things were coordinate GIS efforts across the state, wherever it might be. That includes all levels of government, private sector, academia. Also integrate geospatial data wherever you find it. Sometimes we don't have existing data and new data has to be created. So figure out how to make that happen. We'll talk about budgets and dollars in a second. But a lot of that responsibility was knocking on doors to see if we could find funding partners. And obviously distributing data is an important thing, important enough that it was brought up several different ways and times in that state statute. All of those things are outward looking from the state, but also include serving state constituents. This last one, Service GIO for State Agencies, is the only one that was strictly internal. So I know text is boring, but it's also important, and I want to point out a few of the things that I think were really, really important in our state statute. First of all, the governor shall appoint an individual. But notice that it doesn't say governor's brother-in-law or cousin or campaign contributor. It says someone who is a GIS professional. And I think that is really key and really important, so that you make sure you get people in that position who can actually support the state's GIS practitioners. Also, this state statute set up an Indiana Mapping Data and Standards Fund. How cool is that? They created a new state fund that you could fill with GIS grants. How to administer it belonged in this statute. It could accept appropriations made to the fund by the General Assembly and other gifts and grants that could be received to support GIS purposes. So this nice little fund was envisioned by our state legislators. It was created in statute. I have to think this happened like late on a Friday afternoon, and then everybody went away for the weekend, and something big must have happened over that weekend, because when they came back Monday morning, they forgot to put money in that fund. Whoops, that was a challenge. Especially when you consider that the state statute is very specific about using money from that fund to do all the things that you would expect a GIO to do. And many of these you can recognize belong in one or more of those buckets that I already mentioned. And also, the state statute mentions the Indiana Geographic Information Council and assigns responsibilities to IGIC or its successor. In particular, it says, IGIC, you need to recommend data standards to the Geographic Information Officer. Also, IGIC, you need to produce a yearly statewide data integration plan, deliver that to the GIO. In either case, if the GIO doesn't like it, it can go back to IGIC and say, you really need to change this part and this part. Or the GIO can just say, heck with it, I'm going to do my own. These other things, I think the first one, the GIO serving on the U.S. Board of Geographic Names is kind of interesting. That seems like a great place to put that responsibility. Also, making use of state educational institutions' resources is there. And again, you can see distributing GIS data as being something that's mentioned here and in other places. This ugly graph is something that I'm not going to go into, but I just wanted to flash it up here to show you how these different GIO responsibilities fall out. And you can see the kind of gray-blue is GIO, the other color is IGIC, and they actually work very well together. And that's, I think, been a key, one of many keys to successful governance in Indiana. So you can see a lot of responsibilities. This very weirdly shaped thing. So I think probably I had just seen the first of the Aliens movies, like right before I created this thing. And so I was a bit influenced by that. But it has some information that I want to point out to you that I think is also important. First of all the way over to the left, National States Geographic Information Council in many ways has been the mothership for how we've done things in Indiana with governing GIS. You can see at the top on the left, there's the Indiana Geographic Information Office. On the bottom is IGIC and all of its committees and the sectors where the board members come from. And leading off from both of those is this thing called the Data Integration Plan that I mentioned just a minute ago. That informs all kinds of other things. It's a very important document. So all those different data work groups that you see there contribute to the data integration plan and are helpful to the GIO for making sure that those different data classifications are addressed. You can see all the way to the right, you've got all kinds of partners, and I'm sure that generically, these partnerships would be something that you can imagine and would expect. We'll also say that from the framework data work groups, you can see an arrow down to the Indiana map. That is about 260 data layers about Indiana. So they're statewide data layers that are available from maps.indiana.edu. You can download, you can stream, you can get metadata. There's a built-in viewer. It is a wonderful resource. Also, under projects and initiatives in this window, the data sharing initiative is something I want to be sure to mention, because in 2008, when I was GIO, we invited all the county commissioners to share land parcel boundaries, administrative boundaries, center lines, and point addresses with the state. That was a really stupid idea. I was told that many, many times, because counties and state government don't get along. So if you get 20 of those, you'd be doing very, very, very well. We got all 92 Indiana counties to participate. So we've got some great data sets. Now, I will say we took those data, warts and all is the phrase that I used. We didn't improve them other than homogenize them. I've already talked about the ortho programs, the NHD. We've got an active height modernization project going on. We've got a really great, although it's getting a bit stale, return on investment about the Indiana map. I'd be happy to share with you. I talked about the NHD. And like every other state, we built a broadband map in Indiana and did that through the concerted efforts of our GIS community. The same group, by the way, that is working hard to enable our next Gen 911 to be successful by taking advantage of geospatial data. So I think that probably gets me to the end of my time for now. You can see there's some contact information, and we can come back to that later. And I think we'll probably, it's up to you folks how you want to handle questions, but this is it for me for right now.
So this is Ahmed. Let's move to the second speaker, Christina. And so we'll keep all the questions at the end of both talk. Okay. But anytime if you have questions, feel free to type in the chat room. So Christina, when you're ready, please share your screen.
Okay. Sharing the screen. Also, it helps if I'm unmuted. Okay. Thanks everybody for joining today. I'm gonna get my timer started so that I can try and not run us over. Okay. I'm Christina Boggs-Shavira. I work with the Department of Water Resources here in Sacramento in our Sustainable Groundwater Management Office. But a lot of people know me from different avenues. I was looking over the list of people who have joined, and I recognize a lot of names. Some of you I know from CGIA, some of you I know from ERISA, from NorCal ERISA, from the CalGIS conference, from Women in GIS, and I'm excited to see you guys online today. I've seen a lot of Zoom meetings recently, and I decided that I would go ahead and put some real pictures of real life Christina to start us off. The horse on the left is an Icelandic horse, and they're so friendly and so happy. And then in the center, we have some lights, some northern lights from Iceland. And our apartment we were staying in was literally like 30 feet away from this little walking path, and it just set us up in the perfect spot to get that shot. And my husband's a commercial photographer, so he loves staging us for all these like phenomenal shots. So if any of you follow me on Instagram too, you may have seen other pictures that he set up for us. And this is a selfie with the llama because llamas are cute. So I wanted to kind of get a start by talking about DWR, and the whole point of this talk today is to talk to you guys about DWR's data stewardship program, and specifically kind of how we develop data to share out and to share internally and to try and make this use of data better at DWR. And so to kind of give you perspective of where we were at before, I've been with DWR now for, goodness, about nine and a half. I'm coming up on 9.5 years. And some of this happened before I started at DWR, and some of it happened at the beginning, and some of it happened recently. And it's really nice to have seen the spectrum and to have walked into my job at DWR, and it was on my duty statement to be active with all of this enterprise GIS stuff. And so it was really, really nice to see it from that perspective. So where we were, DWR has 4 region offices, and those region offices do different work with GIS data. We also have other like field offices, but they do less with mapping data. And we also have a bunch of programs at our headquarters, and each office has their pet projects that they work on. And a lot of offices work on projects just specific to their neighborhood. And we had different users had different applications that they were using. Some of them were using ArcGIS. We had a couple of groups using some CAD for things that probably would have been more well suited to a GIS application. I have not yet heard of people using open source GIS back then, but I'm sure it existed just quietly. We had pockets of activity across DWR, and if you were in the know, you knew the other people in the department who had GIS installed and other people who were likely to have data. But there were pockets of data, and different people had different bits of data across the department. And for specific programs, we had consultants who would make GIS files that were released with a specific project in mind. And then we had the data hoarders. I am mentioning that this was hugely beneficial, but it is that practice that meant that today we have a lot of data from the olden days. Our path to where we're at now started with lots of surveys of users of GIS applications, and we developed a series of use cases why streamlining all of our GIS across the department would help. And with it, there was a small committee formed initially, and then there was a second committee formed later, and that's where I came in at. I came in and I was a part of the second committee. I'm pulling out of this because, oh, okay, sorry. For some reason, I can't see the chat, so best wishes if you're trying to use the chat to say something to me right now. So we had a series of use cases to help make our appeal to the department heads to help drive some group activity. And with all of those committees and the subcommittees, it helped us to write standards, implement the standards, find out that we needed to change stuff, and then write more standards and do more standards. Where we're at now, so we've had 10 years of the Enterprise GIS Committee at DWR, and we have a, you know, for all the lumps and bumps, I think that we do federated GIS across the department pretty well. So we do have a couple of specific teams that only do GIS stuff. One of them's nested in our Department of Technology Services group, and we have another one that falls, they're called GIS Services, but they fall under the surveying side of things. And really they help maintain our atlas, our shared data. And they have just been a godsend, and the staff in that group is just super helpful. Actually, both groups, the DTS GIS side and the DOE GIS side, they've just been wonderful. But mostly we have GIS that's now federated across the department. But coming together with a GIS committee, it helps us get an enterprise license agreement. And it helps us develop spatial data standards so that we're all creating data and sharing data and doing GIS to some similar levels. One of the other really cool things that has come out of all of the Enterprise GIS Committee, to me, I think it's really cool, is that we have boilerplate contract language now that says, hey, consultant, anything you make for us, you have to use spatial data standards, which means now it's easy to specify to a consultant who's doing something for you, hey, that data that you're making, it needs to meet these standards. And rather than having to spell out all of the details, and honestly, in many cases, if somebody's hiring a consultant to do GIS work, they may not know all of the details that they should be looking for. So rather than having them need to do extensive work pre-scoping, it lets them use the spatial data standards to kind of blanket layout needs for the data deliverables at the end. The other thing that's come out of this is a really cool data stewardship program. Our data stewardship program, I've included the full details on the data stewardship program are included in the spatial data standards. I've made mention of this. I shared a copy of our spatial data standards with Min, and I think the plan is for her to post our slides with, and I asked her to go ahead and include the spatial data standards with it. That way you guys could reference them if you'd like. The spatial data standards sets up kind of a broad policy across the department on how we should be doing data development at the department. And when you're a designated data steward, you get into a fairly formal agreement. And I say for transparency because many GISers at DWR in particular, I'm not sure if this is similar to other departments, but many of us like to work on data that we like. And sometimes one of my old bosses, he used to refer to it as skunk work, because you would sneak in time working on spatial data that you want to work on when you had a little bit of gap time that maybe your regular projects are slowed down or whatever. So you would sneak in this data development for something that you're working on otherwise that might not have the money or the time to allow you to work on it. So you kind of sneak it in a little bit, and there's like in a lunch break or whatever. But by having this formal agreement, it lets you have a clear communication path with your supervisor and with your management chain that you're going to work on this data set because it's good for the department. And I really appreciate that, because it makes, on this silly little form, because, you know, we're government, so we love forms. It makes not only the data steward sign it, but their supervisor, so that that supervisor is acknowledging at some point that you are going to work on this. And I find that satisfying, because it helps bring everybody's attention to the fact that this data stewardship is good for all of us, and it's good for us to be able to use data that is high quality. The data is also, once your forms are done, you then get your forms reviewed. Sorry, it gets your forms reviewed by a subcommittee, and many of the people on the subcommittee are actually data stewards themselves, and it's a group of subject matter experts across the department, many of the old timers and the data hoarders. So they know if you're doing a data stewardship plan for a data set that is being used elsewhere in the department, they know that, oh, we should mention to them that so-and-so has something else. You should check to make sure it's not leaving out edits that they've seen. And so that review is really good. And after you've done the forms and you've gotten the approval to it, you work on really robust metadata development. At this point, it's FGDC metadata, which is a fair to middling amount of metadata. And after you write that metadata up, there are detailed quality assurance, quality control checks on the data set. It's nice because the spatial data standards spell out some specific checks that we should be doing. And for those of us who kind of just use data on a regular basis, maybe it's not in our habit to do quality checks on it. But the spatial data standards spelling out quality checks you should be doing is really good, because it helps ensure you're getting a better data set out of it. Out of our data stewardship program, we get good internal data continuity. And within those forms, the subject matter expert, the data steward, determines when that data set should be updated. It'll put it on a regular schedule, or say, nope, this is legacy data and it shouldn't need to get updated, but we'll update it if somebody finds an error. Or if you say that, oh, this is a regularly updating data set, and so we're gonna update it quarterly or whatever. We also get a bunch of external services, and I put our REST endpoint there for all of you guys who want some data. And then a bunch of this data also goes to Open Data, which is the California Natural Resources Association Open Data Platform. And the link is there as well. I'm running late on time, sorry. So we would like to continue to get more data sets in our data stewardship program and continue to use existing work to stop recreating data. So if you're creating this data set for this other thing, just go a half a step farther and write some metadata and put it up on the atlas, so that people don't have to do it all over again when they create it the next time. Helping communication, when it goes up on the atlas, then for us internally, nobody has to spread the word and ask, hey, has anybody done this before? Because you can just look, and if you find it, done. We're also continuing to improve the automation of replication across our resources. And I know that sounds hoity-toity, but really we have some different environments. We have a development environment where me as a data steward, I get to go in and I fix stuff there, and then, oh, it's good? Okay. Hey, Greg, push the button, it's ready to go to production. And then, okay, it goes to production, and then, okay, the production updates the web servers, blah, 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 move it to the other stuff, and then 3 steps later, it ends up on open data. Okay, sorry, I'm at 17 minutes, but feel free to ask some questions, or if we don't get to your question during this part, then feel free to shoot me an email. Also, let me, small loophole, I am prefacing to this group of people right now, I would love to share any of the forms referenced in the Spatial Data Standards document if you read it and you decide you want some form that is not available in the document itself. You can please shoot me an email and reference the fact that I mentioned in this meeting I would like to share those forms, and could I send them to you? It's a loophole, but that makes it an informational request because I offered it, not a Public Information Act request that I have to fill out forms for. It's the little things in life.
Thank you,
but yeah,
Christina.
thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Christina, and thank you, Jim, for your talk. So by that, I want to open up questions. So Jan Schaefer-Kramer had a question earlier to Jim about who participates in the Indiana GIS Council, and are these high-level policymakers, or do they get funding for their time spent in the council business?
Yeah, and Steve added on to that, or even travel expenses. So recognizing Indiana north to south is still maybe not even half of California's north to south. Travel is not that much of an issue. So we do not pay, have never paid travel expenses. We do make available technology such as Zoom for our council meetings. We do a lot of business over the telephone or Zoom, and that's perfectly fine. Jane, to answer your question, we tried so hard to get elected officials and higher decision makers to be part of the council, and for the most part failed to do that. We did have someone from the Lieutenant Governor's office who spent a lot of time with us, and that was wonderful and worthwhile. But we had some folks from elected officials from county office from time to time, but overall, we didn't succeed very well with that. So what we did instead was try to prepare the IJIC members to be able to approach their own elected officials in their own geography. For instance, we had a state legislator come in and talk to us for about an hour about how to talk to a state legislator. We prepared materials and pitch points and elevator speeches, and all of that I think was very helpful, and all of that was in light of not being able to do what you had asked if we were able to do.
So just similar on that perspective that you mentioned, you did talk about in the statute, there's a mapping funding, right? And did you mention that fund never really?
I did, yeah. So that weekend between putting the fund language in and what I would have imagined a discussion about how much to put in the fund, I think maybe the Colts lost a big game or something. Anyway, legislators came in, they never put any in, never, not the first time ever, or since then. I will say this though, the Indiana Department of Office of Technology they were the host for the office, so they took care of office costs and paid a little bit of travel for the GIO and the salary for the GIO, and that was very helpful. But we've spent about $18 million to date on those projects that I mentioned a little earlier. All of that came from finding people who said, yes, that data set or that effort or that initiative is worthwhile enough to me to invest. And what I discovered is that if you make that ask and you already have a little bit of money in your pocket, you get a lot farther a lot quicker.
So another question, since Jim, you probably heard that we have a new state GIO just started. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, and then we're really looking forward to having someone like ISAC to help us statewide. But in your experience, I think this question is sort of, you know, getting around that the position. How much I don't know if it's appropriate to ask, how much politics that did you do you need to maneuver through as a GIO?
That's a great question. And obviously, if the statute says that the GIO will be appointed by the governor, that sort of puts politics right in there to start with. However, I tried very hard not to be political, and I think I succeeded in doing that. I would talk to folks from either party without regard to what their politics happened to be. That didn't matter to me. What mattered to me was getting GIS applied in the best way that we could across the state. And I changed some minds who were in the other party, not the governor's party, about that over time. It took some effort. It was really a matter of trust that had to be built up, that this is not, for me, it's not about politics. But I never got a shakedown from the governor's office or the lieutenant governor's office about operating that way. They were very supportive. And the statute clearly says you work for everybody. And that includes all levels of government, doesn't say which party. And that's the way that I proceeded. And I think it was helpful to be upfront, open, transparent, and to operate without regard to politics.
Thank you, Jim. So Christina, I have before we closed up, I have a question for you. I think you mentioned about the data holders, that that becomes beneficial, and can you explain a little bit more on the data stewardship program?
I would love to. So the data hoarders, it's at first, when I started at the department, I got told, oh, if you're looking for GIS data, ask so-and-so, and then if he doesn't have it, ask him, and if he doesn't have it, ask her, and then ask the group. And I have found that has actually served me very well. And even to this day, Jane is on here. Jane knows that if I don't have some data, Jane, the first one was the guy who worked next to me. And then the next one was the guy who worked across the street. And then it was Jane. And so Jane got a lot of my data asks for a long time, and still now. And the thing is, the data hoarders were really invaluable because we got to the point where there was a lot of data who, you know, everybody's struggling with succession planning these days and what we're going to do as more and more people retire. The other challenge we had was people squirreling away data on their hard drives, and it's not on the network. And then that hard drive crashes, or they get a new computer and they forgot they had it partitioned and it was over there. So occasionally we will get abandoned data. Somebody will like show up with a pile of stuff and, do you want this? We just recently had a very valuable member of the GIS community at DWR retire. Many of you guys might know her, Sarah Narisian. She's out of our Fresno office. And this other guy at DWR, Joel and I got to do a GIS exit interview with her. And we spent several hours over a couple of days discussing kind of data sets that she had worked on and how she had stuff laid out. I had the advantage of having worked with her previously, like pretty closely on some projects. So kind of I speak Siren, how she labels stuff, how she sets stuff out. And we were able to get a special spot on our shared drive to kind of dump all of her files. I know that might seem a little disconcerting to some, but the thing is, if you're retiring, I would rather have you like empty your whole desk into the drawer than to have everything just go away, because then it meant that the stuff that she worked on is not gone entirely. So those data hoarders were helpful because we have now been able to use some really little light macros written to crawl folder structures and to do a kind of a light indexing on what data sets are available, and pretty much kind of interrogate the files just based on what is in their Windows file. So we're able to get all those together, and it was nice because it means that we're able to dig around a little bit because of those data hoarders.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I actually have more questions, but since we're running short on time, I encourage everyone to contact Christina and Jim if you have more questions. And if you have any questions or any feedback, here's my email, chair@cgia.org. We also looking for suggestions for the future webinar speaker series events. And thank you, Jim, again, and Christina again for your presentations. And thank you for everyone who joined today's webinar. Yeah. By that, I will close today's webinar, and take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.